to take place today or yesterday as Americans all across the country gather together to recommit to the promise to never forget. Yesterday, a candlelight service was held in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, near where United Flight 93 went down.
It's a beautiful memorial to all of them, and it seems like yesterday that it happened.
Others gathered in New York, like Iowa firefighter Nate Smith.
Just to kind of pay tribute to fallen brothers and sisters. It's pretty emotional.
Promising to always remember those lost on 9/11.
We're here to pay our respect to all our friends and our co-workers and everybody else, all the innocent lives that were taken that day. A larger memorial service begins just a little bit later this morning at the Pentagon. There will, of course, be many other events all across the country. President Biden will be attending events at each of the 3 crash sites beginning in just about an hour in New York. Marcella?
Certainly a somber anniversary, Zach. Thank you. As we remember the people who lost their lives, we're also shedding a light on the heroes who emerged that day. In Virginia, some of the very first responders on scene were members of the Arlington County Fire Department. Lorenzo Hall tells us dozens of those same firefighters are still serving today.
20 years have gone by.
Did it crash over there in the Pentagon? Is that correct?
I was trying intentionally to remember everything.
Oh my goodness. We're looking at a live picture from Washington, and there is smoke pouring out of the Pentagon.
But memories of September 11th are never distant.
There was an odor.
For some firefighters with the Arlington County Fire Department.
Yes, we're aware of the explosion. We heard that it was a plane down. Can you confirm?
Who were on scene within minutes after American Airlines Flight 77 crashed into the Pentagon.
We're getting numerous calls.
Moments before the attack, Fred Kowalski, relatively new on the job, was cleaning the fire trucks.
This is my first pretty much real fire. At that point in my career, I don't think I've seen a house fire at that time.
Mike Gowan was doing routine physical fitness training away from the firehouse.
We didn't even know what was going on. We had no idea that anything had gone in the World Trade Center.
Jaleel Davis was off and heard about the disaster on TV.
And then I said, I should go to work. Going from viewing it on television to actually being there, it was sort of surreal.
Okay, all units responding over to the Pentagon. You need to be careful, possible terrorist attack.
It was different times when we would get a notice that another plane was coming and everyone would just like take off running. But it happened like several times.
I guess that probably was the plane that ended up in Shanksville.
It was senseless act of violence that didn't need to take place.
They assigned us to go into one part of the building to search for survivors.
I vividly remember, like I would say, like to the left, it would be a desk with a coffee mug with coffee still in it, papers still stacked. But just to the right of it, total devastation, floor collapse.
125 people were killed in the Pentagon, along with 64 passengers and crew on Flight 77.
105 to Arlington emergency.
It's a day they'll always remember, but there are many aspects these firefighters have tried to forget over the decades.
Yes, I don't talk about it a whole lot. I kind of just buried it. I remember seeing individuals who had no injuries to them at all. It appeared to have no injury whatsoever, but yet they perished. And I knew there was nothing I can do for those people at the time. I guess just pray to God that their family has some type of assurance that they did not suffer. And that was...
Initially, after it happened out near Southgate Road, people had set up a bulletin board and they were posting pictures of their loved ones that, you know, were perished in the building. I don't think at the time I could have managed to see one of the people on that board that I'd seen in the building. I think that I've put it comfortably away where it needs to be put and dealt with it. Initially, after the event, I didn't do very many of the ceremonies and things like that.
While they tried to block out a lot of what they saw inside, they take pride in their response.
My dad said, we're very proud of you. And that is like gold, man. You don't get better than that.
We were just there to help. And we were just in a moment and we didn't realize the magnitude of what was actually happening. or how significant it would be long term.
And I was honored to be at work that day.
These aren't the only firefighters in Arlington who continue to serve after 9/11. There are roughly 70 men and women who are still with the department today. Shanksville is a tiny town in western Pennsylvania. It is also where the passengers on United Flight 93 lost their lives. They overpowered the hijackers, stopping them from reaching their target here in D.C. A woman who lost her daughter on that plane has made it her mission to make sure we never forget. Here's Nicole D'Antonio.
It's been 20 years. Depending on the view that I take, as a mother losing her daughter, it's as if it were yesterday.
For Deborah Borza, these pictures serve as a reminder of the daughter she lost on September 11th, 2001.
She was back in the Newark area visiting her girlfriends who were all starting their junior years in college. She was heading home. She was a standby passenger on United 93.
At 20 years old, she was one of the youngest passengers on the flight.
She was just amazing. She was intelligent. She loved the French language. She was very fluent in French. So she was always setting her sights on something that was a little more challenging.
Since this tragic day, Borza has played an active role in helping tell the stories of the men and women who lost their lives. First, by helping create a permanent Flight 93 memorial, and now with a trail connecting these 3 crash sites in D.C., New York, and Shanksville, Pennsylvania.
To remember those who died that day, over 2,700 people, remembering and discovering and connecting, is what the trail is meant to provide.
Borza wanted to tell the stories of September 11th for generations to come. She plans to be back in Pennsylvania for the memorial to honor the legacies of the lives lost, including her own daughter.
It's a very moving moment for me, especially when I pause and look out at everyone who's there that day. They get to hear her name. It's her mom, saying her name. It's just a very, very special moment.
A powerful reminder of a day we will never forget. Nicole D'Antonio, WSA 9.
Borza says she also plans to take part in the Tour de Trail, a 24-mile bike ride along the September 11th National Memorial Trail, ending at the Flight 93 National Memorial. The 9/11 Remembrance Relay wraps up later today. Participants have traveled 177 miles to honor the 177 American service women who have died in combat in the last 20 years. The final leg starts this morning at the Columbia Island Marina. The group will walk past the Jefferson, MLK, and Lincoln memorials before heading to the Military Women's Memorial in Arlington for a closing ceremony at 2:30. There will be ceremonies all across the DMV to honor those we lost on 9/11. Fire Station 5 in Arlington sent first responders into the Pentagon that day. They are hosting a remembrance at 11 a.m. In Fairfax County, crews from Station 10, the Bailey's Crossroads Volunteer Fire Department, were also sent to the Pentagon. They are hosting a ceremony at 2 p.m. We'll be right back. It's the Army's oldest active duty unit, the 3rd Infantry, or the Old Guard. It's normally a ceremonial unit, but after the 9/11 attack on the Pentagon, they were some of the first soldiers on the ground searching for victims. As Matt Gregory reports, they left as heroes, but with mental and physical scars that are still with them today.
They're the Army's oldest active duty unit, the 3rd Infantry, or the Old Guard. They're a ceremonial unit that normally presides over funerals, escorts the president from time to time, and even welcomes foreign dignitaries. But on 9/11, this ceremonial unit was among the first to go into the wreckage of the Pentagon and search for survivors. 20 years later, members of that unit say they're still dealing with the mental and physical trauma of September 11th.
It will always be that day when I see it.
Like so many of us, Danny Farrar can't forget what happened on 9/11. But sometimes,
Kind of the lost, I guess you call it lost generation of 9/11.
it feels like the country forgot about him and his fellow soldiers.
That picture seems to be from the area of the bridges, the 14th Street Bridge.
After American Airlines Flight 77 crashed into the Pentagon, you saw the mass evacuation and then you saw the fire crews, but you might not have seen Danny and the soldiers of the Army's ceremonial 3rd Infantry, the Old Guard.
I was 22 years old at the time, a young NCO, and you're gonna go from I'm getting ready to hold a toy rifle for a dignitary to you're gonna deploy to downtown DC.
Danny and the rest of Charlie Company watched the Pentagon's perimeter as fire crews battled the blaze, and then families of victims began to show up.
I mean, 24 hours, you just listen to people sobbing and wailing and crying, and you know, it had a profound effect on me.
As the fire went out, Charlie Company volunteered for the next task, recovering the bodies from inside the wreckage. 20 years later, Danny Farrar remembers those first steps into the Pentagon, dressed with little more than a plastic suit, gloves, and a surgeon mask.
There's wires hanging all over the place. Walls have buckled. You're walking anywhere between ankle deep to calf deep water from where the fire department has sprayed so much water trying to put the fire out.
Amid the wreckage, he remembers finding pieces of the plane, birthday cards and teddy bears, and worst of all, human body parts.
You know, the nature of the way that you find these remains it's pretty horrific. I mean, if you can think of a bad way to find a human person, we found them in that way.
For the next few weeks, around the clock, the men of Charlie Company combed the rubble for victims. These are images that Danny still carries in his head. And for years after, he battled depression, PTSD, and a slew of physical problems that came from this 9/11 work.
It wasn't until the 17th reunion where we all sat down and we're all like, man, yeah, my stomach's just jacked up and my skin is messed up and I have these issues or these nightmares, where guys started to talk.
That was 2018, the first time since 9/11 Danny and the men of the Army's 3rd Infantry Charlie Company reunited, and healing began.
The moment that you understand that you're not alone, I think, is always a profound moment for people, and it makes them feel like, ah, man, I can let my guard down a bit because I'm not weak, I'm not a pansy. A lot of people are struggling.
But 20 years later, the men of Charlie Company haven't forgotten each other. Danny tells me, and he feels that many of his fellow soldiers feel the same way, that despite the trauma they dealt with from that day, if the same situation happened, they have no doubt in their minds they would volunteer again for the task. At the Pentagon, I'm Matt Gregory, WUSA 9.
This year, again, the guys of Charlie Company will hold their own remembrance. For the 20th anniversary, Danny and his nonprofit, Platoon 22, raised thousands of dollars to reunite the forgotten soldiers of Charlie Company. 20 years after being rescued from the Pentagon on 9/11, a woman who experienced the attack as a young girl now has a dream to serve her country. Tom Dempsey brings us the story of Hannah Bourne and how she used her trauma from 9/11 to help others.
When I look at those pictures, it really clarifies for me what it's about.
Inside the Bourne family's home in Alexandria, pictures tell stories of moments throughout their lives, but one painting in particular shows the impact of 9/11.
In her words, she described, this is the airplane, this is the Pentagon.
The attack on the Pentagon, seen through the eyes of 3-year-old Hannah Bourne. On that day 20 years ago, her mother worked nearby at Bolling Air Force Base as a member of the Air Force. She dropped Hannah and her 4-month-old daughter Heather at the Pentagon daycare that morning.
One of my orderly room sergeants came in and said, ma'am, the Pentagon's been hit. And then it became real. We're basically at war.
there was sounds of sirens and choppers and jets overhead, fire alarms. I remember just a lot of confusion and being overwhelmed and then struggling to process what was happening.
Others inside the Pentagon helped get the two sisters to safety. For Hannah, trauma from the experience lingered, but talking with her parents and putting her feelings on paper brought a big change.
What helped was realizing that all of those things I was so scared of, sirens, fire alarms, I shouldn't be associating them with danger and fear, but actually the people who were coming to help.
And she, after 9/11, decided she wanted to have an American flag birthday cake. And so we nicknamed her our Little Patriot.
Years later, that little patriot and her younger sister followed in their mother and father's footsteps by joining the military.
It kind of has inspired both of us to be part of that help instead of just being stuck in the trauma.
2 decades after experiencing the terror of 9/11, the anniversary provides a moment to reflect and a chance for Hannah Bourne to live her dream of serving.
There's a lot of people whose lives were forever changed by 9/11, and personally, I feel that the best way to continue to remember and honor those lives and that sacrifice is to serve.
Tom Dempsey, WUSA 9.
In southern Maryland, there is a remembrance ceremony at 9:30 this morning honoring Charles County residents who died at the Pentagon. It's in front of the government building in La Plata. In Loudoun County, Virginia, the town of Purcellville will hold its annual remembrance ceremony at 9 a.m. That is at the town's First Responders Monument at 250 South Nursery Avenue. Tonight, the annual September 11th Arlington Memorial 5K race will have both in-person and virtual runners. The race starts at 6 p.m. outside the Doubletree Hotel on Army-Navy Drive. Since the first race in 2002, more than $800,000 has been raised for 9/11 related charities. Organizers hope to push that figure to over $1 million with tonight's race. We'll be right back. Welcome back to our 9/11 special, remembering the September 11th attacks 20 years later. As we remember the lives lost, we also celebrate those who made it out alive and those who saved them. They are the heroes behind the scenes who saved those who were lucky enough to make it out of the Pentagon. Etched in Christine Owen's mind.
I just remember how beautiful it was.
As fate would have it,
a beautiful blue sky, not a cloud.
That beautiful morning of September 11th, 2001.
I could see a plume of smoke in the distance, and I just kind of trekked on in through the city.
A plane had just hit the Pentagon, chaos waiting for her as she pulled up to MedStar Washington Hospital Center, where she worked as a nurse.
It was like something I had never seen before. It was people moving fast and IV poles and IVs being hung and strung.
10 burn victims were brought in that day.
You really have a front row seat to the suffering aspect.
September 11th was Dr. Jack Sava's first day at work as the hospital's new trauma surgeon.
I had been hired, but my DC license hadn't come through, so I was kind of wandering around trying to be useful, but wasn't allowed to touch patients.
He was granted an emergency license and went straight to work.
The most obvious thing about this event that everybody remembers is it smelled like jet fuel. So that was, sort of a smell that was immediately associated with the event that everybody took home with them and remembered for the rest of their life.
The chaos had sort of settled down, and we were all outside, and we were on the helipad, and we were on the ambulance ramp, and it was such an amazing day, and we were just like, okay, where are these people? Like, we need to help these people. And then a sense of panic ensued, and we were like, well, maybe they're not coming because they can't get here.
184 victims died at the Pentagon that day, including the 59 passengers and crew on board American Airlines Flight 77. Those who made it to the hospital were lucky to be alive.
I mean, the thing that struck me both about the victims and the team, there was sort of an attitude of like, absolutely not. No one's going to die here.
9 of the 10 victims at MedStar survived. And 20 years later, Christine Owen wonders what happened to those who got a second chance.
What did you do with that gift? And I would want to know what they're up to and what they've been doing with their lives.
In addition to those who lost their lives, there are those who were ready to make that sacrifice that horrible day. Lieutenant General Mark Shanksville and Heather Penny flew F-16s for the Air National Guard. After watching the planes hit the Trade Center, they took off. There was no time to load their missiles, so they knew that their weapon would be the jet they were in. They had assigned themselves a suicide mission. They knew there was a plane flying low in Pennsylvania, but before they could intercept it, the passengers took out the hijackers and themselves by crashing United Flight 93 in Pennsylvania. Civilians whose sacrifice let them live.
I think about it every day. Those on Flight 93 that paid the ultimate price, those are the real heroes.
Sass and I owe our lives to them. That's also why when I think of 9/11, instead of being overcome by the trauma and the horror and the tragedy, I'm actually overcome by hope. That the best of who we are was demonstrated on that day. So in some ways, living my life as normally as possible is the biggest way that we can say that the terrorists did not win.
So many incredible stories from that day, and we hope those stories will help you reflect on the meaning of this day and the many gifts we've all received from these survivors and heroes. CBS News coverage of today's ceremonies will begin shortly. Thanks for watching.